Welcome to PwC Pulse, a podcast to provide insights to help you solve today's business challenges.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wes Bricker, Vice Chair and U.S. Trust Solutions Co-Leader at PwC. More than ever before, people are looking to businesses, large and small, to take the lead in tackling big issues facing society. They want to know, are companies helping to address the climate crisis, or are they making it worse? Are business leaders pushing back against discrimination and bias by treating their people fairly? Customers, employees, shareholders, lawmakers, and regulators are laser-focused on topics like these, which all fall under the broad umbrella of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. Taking ESG seriously isn't just good for companies' reputations, it's good for business. And while companies have long been able to craft their ESG stories largely as they saw fit, that's beginning to change. The world's biggest investors are seeking greater transparency. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, has proposed rules governing climate disclosures. How can business leaders guide employees and stakeholders in these efforts? Joining us today to help us understand what this latest ESG news means for business leaders is Beth Sasfai, Chief ESG Officer at Verizon. Beth, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we dive in, I wanted to ask a couple of rapid-fire questions just to get us warmed up and going. So first question, what is your favorite city to visit?
Barcelona.
Wonderful city. Favorite book?
Well, what I've been reading recently was The Crucible by Arthur Miller, and it's a very interesting read right now.
It sure is.
Yep.
Here's a fun one. What's your favorite walk-up song?
Glory Days or anything by Bruce Springsteen.
Who's your inspiration?
My dad, who didn't go to college and sat with me every night after dinner at the table, teaching me how to analyze and talk about issues.
That's wonderful.
Hats off to him.
Yes. So let's jump in. First question that I'd really like to get started with is really about your career journey. You have a fascinating journey. You started out at Verizon in the Office of the General Counsel. You have a litigation background, and now you're the Chief ESG Officer at Verizon. Take us through that journey a bit.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different things at the company. I came out of a law firm and went into our regulatory team in the general counsel's office, litigating rate-regulated cases before the Board of Public Utilities. And I learned the company. It was a great way to start. Before I got this chief ESG role, I was doing a lot of governance work with the board of directors. My team led governance policy. And that really enabled me to pull together a lot of the things I'd been doing at the company, right? I understood the business strategy. I'd been in litigation, as you said, so I had kind of a view towards how to handle and think about systemic risk. I had a lot of contacts from being in litigation. I learned how to kind of master new areas. And so then, in the governance role, our board oversees obviously all sorts of risks, issues, financial and non-financial. So I got kind of a firsthand seat there.
It's a long journey, and sometimes we talk about ESG, sometimes we talk about sustainability. ESG is broader than that. It touches many aspects of business and the impact of business. What are some of the skill sets that you see being required to really address ESG?
ESG is only successful at a company if you foster collaboration, consensus. You've got to spend a lot of time with business leaders, helping them understand what are the company's key ESG issues. How do these fit into our strategy, right? How do we think about integration? And you've got to kind of be able to bring very different people with different agendas to the table, achieve consensus, whether it's around setting a climate commitment or how we're going to talk about our diversity goals. You really need to be able to build those relationships. And the other thing I would say that is very important is being a proactive person. So if you're reactive in an ESG role with everything that's going on right now in this ecosystem, you're going to be doing a lot of things that may not actually affect the bottom line or be that important to your ESG strategy.
I love that point. And it really feeds into my next question around a jarring gap, really, between business leaders and customers and employees. Our research has shown us that a majority of people would rather work for or buy from companies that take ESG seriously. And at the same time, we found there's really a disconnect between what executives say they're doing on ESG and what consumers perceive. So our work with clients has really shown us that clear ESG reporting and transparency is one really good way to build trust. How do you see companies building trust with stakeholders like employees and consumers when it comes to ESG?
I think reporting is all about transparency, and it is one of the key ways to build trust with various stakeholders, right? With investors, with your customers, with broader stakeholders, and certainly with your employees. I think one of the real challenges is making sure that you're thinking about your audience and you're talking about your ESG issues and performance and commitment in a way that they can understand, right? And one of the things I've seen in the last year as my team has matured is our ability to take some of our ESG investor-focused reporting and make it a little more digestible. So how do we think about it when we're talking to customers who may or may not have a lot of familiarity with intricate cybersecurity procedures, right? Or how do we talk to our employees about our climate goals? Do they know what net zero means? And so I think part of it is transparency, and part of building trust is educating and helping people understand kind of what's important and what ought to be important to them.
It's a really good point. As companies tell their story, over time, companies have told their ESG story sort of their own way. And then as that information was more widely used, there's a desire to compare performance. How's one business model comparing to the next? Or even within a peer group, how does one company compare to the next? That's a big shift in terms of the standards and the rules that companies are using to tell their story. How do you see that coming together?
I think there's some tension, right? Everywhere I go now, everyone wants to talk about data. And Verizon has been very focused on data in our ESG journey. It's frankly not so easy to do a lot of quantitative reporting. You've got to pre-assure metrics. You need to understand what you're measuring. You need controls. So that can be challenging. But what I do find in a lot of the engagement with our investors in particular, and some of our other stakeholders, they care about the story. And they care about the qualitative narrative. They want to understand, what's your governance? How are you thinking about risk management? What's your strategy? The metrics are important, but they're not everything. And so as we think about pulling a lot of our reporting into SEC filings, one of the things my team is struggling with is how to do that, but still preserve some of these more narrative discussions that maybe won't make their way into filings. So how do we not lose that?
I love your points about being proactive, telling the story, doing so with data and credibility and transparency. That undoubtedly takes you across the entire organization, from operations and strategy, how the business is making decisions. It's a multifunctional approach. How do you see maybe something like an ESG controller that really connects dots across the middle of the organization, or even an ESG steering committee? What's the best way that you've found are good approaches to tying together a multidisciplinary effort like this?
You definitely need a cross-functional team, right? When the board of directors built out my centralized team, that was exactly what they had in mind. A team that could look across legal, finance, sustainability, the business, and think about how we're setting commitments, how we're meeting goals, making sure that everybody has the information that they need in order to operate in the space. And as we think about addressing things like the SEC rules, we've formed a cross-functional team between my ESG team, sustainability, and finance. Very close, tight-knit team. There's a lot to do right now, and making sure that we're all sharing information. I don't know if it's as important where you sit as it is that you've got folks who understand that the mission is collaboration. I sit under the general counsel. I spend most of my time working with our controller and our chief financial officer.
Which really goes to the point that ESG is across the entire organization. It's enterprise-wide, but it can also be a differentiator. It can be a differentiator for performance, a way of better understanding a business model. How do you see those issues really coming together? ESG as a differentiator for companies.
I think as the space gets more mature, companies will be better at differentiating themselves using ESG. I mean, right now, you need to be a responsible business. That's table stakes. Your customers want to see you as a partner who's helpful to them. The next step is sort of, how do you help your customers meet their goals? Are you creating solutions that help them meet their goals? Does Verizon have our own net zero goal? Yes, we do. And how does that feed into their goals and how they're meeting their goals? And then I think the taking it up a notch step really is, can you help shape customer behavior in what you're doing? And I've seen some companies really innovating in this space, trying to use their branding, their marketing, their advertising to change customer behavior to either be more climate conscious or more conscious of being diverse and inclusive, that's really a win.
I love that point that changing behavior is really driving outcomes within the company and across society. And that really reflects ESG as an important topic for business, but also as a way to change the conversation, whether it's employees or customers. How have you seen it change the relationship maybe with customers, employees, or even the board?
Yeah. So with employees, I've definitely seen us evolve in the last couple of years where employees understand the value of being transparent and talking about what we're doing. I think they understand now that our reporting, our ESG reporting, is a great way to explain all of the terrific governance processes and procedures, our values, all these things we have in place. How do we talk about our impact? And so I have people really proactively coming to me now, lobbying to be in the ESG report and give us data and make sure that what they're doing is captured. So that's been a conversation that's changed. With our board from day one has been amazing. They set a tone from the top. They've been really supportive in terms of resources and in terms of helping us prioritize. And I think I've seen that conversation change now to helping us be more strategic. With so much going on in the space, where should we really focus? What outcomes should we be focused on? And that's always helpful to have the backing of your board like that.
Really important. Let's reflect on the risk side. What are the kinds of things that keep you up at night? Given the importance of the topic to a wide set of stakeholders, whether it's the SEC rules and regulatory expectations or investor expectations, customer expectations, there's a lot of expectations around this topic. Is there anything that you sort of really spend your time focusing on the risk side?
I worry that we're not going to get the consensus that's needed around the data and the reporting that people want. And we're going to continue to get onerous requirements from multiple places that are almost a distraction. And I definitely see the value in reporting. Verizon's a leader in reporting, but you don't want it to just become a compliance exercise. And you do want to make sure companies have the space and the time to be aspirational, very important, to try to move the needle and to keep their eye on the ball. And I worry a little bit that we're going to end up with multiple competing frameworks. Even if the SEC comes out with rules, we've got, a lot of European initiatives, and then we still have investors asking us for slightly different flavors of things. And all of that takes a lot of time and resources and does detract from some of the other things that I'd like companies to be able to focus on.
Yeah, and it really draws on your proactivity point, really leaning in, understanding the business model, and then shaping the discussion.
Right.
So maybe last question, we'll end on a positive note here. What are you most excited about on ESG as a topic and where you see this going?
I am most excited about collaborating with other companies. So I've seen as the space has matured, companies learning from one another, companies challenging each other, companies working on, all right, maybe we don't think this metric works, but what might work? What could we do? How are we capturing data? And then also companies encouraging peers to do more. I mean, Verizon spent a lot of time doing green bonds and green financing and making sure that we're encouraging the use of diverse underwriters. And we've seen peers follow suit. I get a lot of people calling me, asking me how to think about these things. We call our peers to understand, if I read something in the paper, how did you come to this? How are you thinking about it? So I'm really excited to see companies learn from each other and kind of take it up a notch.
It's a terrific point, Beth. Let me just reflect a couple of points that I heard. Being proactive really reflects the leadership that really sits at the heart of ESG. We have to be passionate about it, but we also have to be inclusive.
Yes.
Across the entire enterprise. It takes everyone. Can't do this in a silo. And then also engagement. I love your point about connecting outside the organization, building a consensus because there is fragmentation.
Yeah.
The more we engage, the more consistent, consensus-oriented this area will become. Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. All eyes are on the business community as they take the lead on society's big challenges like ESG. It was great to hear your insights around what that looks like in practice at Verizon and to learn from your own career journey as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes, for the conversation.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of PwC Pulse. For more information on these topics, visit pwc.com.
Thank you for joining us on the PwC Pulse podcast. Subscribe to PwC Pulse wherever you listen to your podcasts or visit pwc.com/Pulse podcast to hear our next episodes.
This podcast is brought to you by PwC, all rights reserved. PwC refers to the U.S. member firm or one of its subsidiaries or affiliates and may sometimes refer to the PwC network. Each member firm is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.